Welcome back to the Bill and Doug Show. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. We're just doing a little something because we think it's interesting. We're going to talk about Ohio State football, and we're going to talk about another team that plays football but doesn't play college football, Bill Landis, but it is a team that you know a lot about.
That would be the Philadelphia Eagles. Yes.
And we are not doing this just because you are Philly Billy who covers Ohio State, but you certainly know Ohio State football inside and out. And then you are, how would you describe yourself as a Philadelphia Eagles fan?
Yeah, like pretty big fan. Like I don't, didn't ruin my life that they lost their playoff game, but, you know, I was pretty bummed that they lost. I am, yeah, I get a little fired up about it sometimes for sure.
But you know them. You know that team well. You know their players, their strategy, their coaches, their expectations. You have a handle on them, as any invested fan does on any team. And the reason we want to talk about this is because the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Philadelphia Eagles won their respective championships a season ago, and now they are both out. And they are both made the playoff. Both lost earlier than anticipated. Ohio State, of course, losing to Miami, and the Eagles losing to the San Francisco 49ers. But there are some similarities there. And I think the conversation that we can have is expectations when you are a championship team and you're trying to repeat. Certainly that was on the table for the Eagles this year. And then also, if there are similar things that maybe held these two teams back, are they reasonable things that held them back? The differences and the similarities between maybe a style and an approach to a team that is trying to repeat. And there just are a couple things between the Birds and the Buckeyes that struck your fancy.
Yeah, I felt this for a while, actually. It kind of like all came together as I was watching the Eagles lose that game on Sunday, like sort of crystallized for me. But like throughout the course of the Eagles season, as I was covering the Ohio State season, and as we've talked with Ohio State fans about the things about this team that made them excited and the things about this team that maybe made them a little worried as Ohio State tried to chase a national championship, I at times felt like I was listening to myself talk a little bit, because I definitely had similar thoughts about the way the Eagles were trying to go about repeating as champions. And I do think there are some parallels that are worth diving into that sort of got both chases off track that, primarily for people watching this, that Ohio State can learn from moving forward.
Yeah. Let's start. So there's a couple of similarities that I think are worth talking about. One is that both the Eagles and the Buckeyes promoted offensive coordinators for the 2025 season from within. We've had this conversation about Brian Hartline and Ohio State, and I think we concluded in the end that it's kind of what Ryan Day had to do, because Brian Hartline was so good at his previous job and so important to Ohio State, and you did not want to risk losing him, and it sort of was his turn. And I don't know if he would have left for sure if Ryan Day had not made him the play caller, but I think you and I had some apprehension about Ohio State and Ryan Day doing that with Brian Hartline.
Me. Yeah.
Okay, I definitely did, but I think we understood.
Just to give you credit, you more than me.
The situation around it. I think we understood why it happened, because there just were circumstances that this guy's kind of earned the promotion, and I think you have to see how it's going to go. Is that a fair assessment of how we viewed Brian Hartline and Ohio State?
Yes. I think the difference between you and I at the time that the hire was made, I was sort of just like, well, if this goes wrong, at least Ryan Day is there as kind of the backstop. But yeah, I think it was certainly easy to wrap your mind around why it happened. Not that Brian Hartline was like the ideal candidate, or that Ohio State could have potentially not done better, but I think everybody sort of got why it happened.
Okay. And so that happened for Ohio State. What happened with the Eagles, it's a similar promotion from within, but does it just stand as sort of another cautionary tale of promoting from within if maybe the guy hasn't really been in that spot before? For this is obviously going to be a mostly Ohio State audience. Explain what the Eagles did and how it was maybe similar or dissimilar to Ohio State and Hartline.
Yeah, so the Eagles coming off of their Super Bowl lost. Why am I forgetting his name? Kellen Moore. Forgot his name for a second. Kellen Moore to a head coaching job, and rather than go outside and replace him, and it's a different scenario for the Eagles too, because the Eagles had a good coordinator in Shane Steichen, lost him to a head coaching job, promoted from within. It was awful in the 2023 season. Fired that guy, went outside again. It was great. They won the Super Bowl. Lost that guy, promoted from within again, and it was awful. So like they're on like kind of this cycle that Ohio State is not quite on. But when the Eagles needed a new offensive coordinator coming into this season, they elevated Kevin Patullo, who was the passing game specialist and associate head coach for the Eagles, and he's basically just kind of been the head coach's right-hand man for a while. Okay. Nick Sirianni's right-hand man for a while. They have been working together at the Colts and then at the Eagles for 8 years, which is as long as Ryan Day and Brian Hartline worked together at Ohio State, with Hartline at least as a full-time position coach. So the timelines are parallel. I think there's less of like there's an element for the Eagles of like the head coach kind of promoted his buddy that I don't think exists with Ohio State and Ryan promoting Brian Hartline, but it was very much sort of like the obvious guy in the building to promote to play caller if you were going to go about it that way.
Okay, let's throw in a possible other similarity here before we draw a conclusion. Ohio State and the Eagles both had an outstanding pair of wide receivers in Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, and in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And let me ask if both these things were maybe true. Is there some belief of, man, like, and plus you had quarterbacks that you believed in, very different. Jalen Hurts as a veteran and Julian Sand as a first-year starter. But like, okay, we think we're going to have quarterbacks who can run this offense. Our receivers are excellent. And so we believe in our talent offensively. And maybe we don't need the greatest schemer of all time to figure out how to keep doing what we did before, which is throw the ball to our very talented guys. And if we're keeping it in-house, we're going to run the same system. Like the template's there and the talent is there. And a belief in the passing game talent maybe in some way contributed to the idea of we're okay promoting from within because we don't have to find ways to move the ball. It's going to be right in front of us. But then in the end, and Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith got the ball a ton, but in the end, the way Ohio State went out, being unable to block Miami and then just not taking advantage of situations, you really didn't put yourself in a position with Ohio State of allowing Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate to win you the games that you have to win. Even though like Jeremiah Smith had a great game against Indiana, but still it's like, okay, did they get you over the top in the end? Were they given the opportunity to be the difference makers to get you over the top? Did you feel the same thing with the Eagles, and do you think there are parallels there with not only promoting the OC, but the receiver talent and what it meant?
Yeah, I think there's an element of we're so talented on offense that it would be difficult for anyone to screw this up. So, like, let's fall back on that. And even if we're having a guy call plays for the first time, not that calling plays is easy, but there should be like a degree of difficulty that's lessened, quite a bit by the talent advantages you have. And I think that was certainly true with Ohio State and its receivers. And I think I think it's true with the Eagles and their receivers. Like you just look at, I guess you don't look at Jalen Hurts quite this way, but I think you could look at like Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown in the very same way you'd look at Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and just say like, well, that team should have like the best, most explosive passing offense in the league because of the personnel that they have. And while like all four receivers we're talking about were certainly productive, I would think that fan bases of both teams would say like, yeah, but like it still felt like something wasn't missing, and like it's not the player's fault really. Although people maybe mad at AJ Brown for dropping passes on Sunday, but I think it's more of like the offense sort of let them down, or to your point, the offense didn't quite maximize what was on hand when it should have been like an incredible advantage for the offense.
I was listening to an NFL podcast just like run through the Niners-Eagles game. And again, having the experience that you were talking about of they're talking about one of these two teams, but it feels like it applies to the other of the two teams. And they were just saying like, They played slow. They didn't really design anything special. There were no trick plays. They kind of just did the same thing over and over again. And it was like, are they talking about Ohio State? Or are they talking about the Eagles? I think maybe the thing that it is that the most unifying thing about Ohio State and the Eagles, and again, I think you'd understand it, and I don't even know if you could blame them for it, is having such a belief in their offensive players that they just sort of assumed it would happen. The offensive players are good enough. The play caller, like, it'll be fine. We don't necessarily have to go outside of ourselves and look for trick plays or really like different kind of things to do, because we'll just get the ball to those guys and they're great. Our guys are better than your guys. And we have had a little bit of that conversation with Ohio State when we talk about the Ohio State-Michigan game. And like, Michigan almost always has a trick play. And it's like we always say the Ohio State trick play is throw it to our more talented receivers. Carnell Tate is the trick. And you understand it on some level, but then when you fall short of maybe what your talent told you could do, or what your own expectations, what your fans' expectations were, you look back and say, what did you do extra to get there? And maybe the belief is we don't have to do anything extra because our guys are so good.
Yeah.
Is that unifying?
I think it is unifying. And like, I think you can even pull back from like the trick play idea, because you can be creative offensively without, doing a double reverse pass, flea flicker kind of thing. Right. But I think maybe in both cases, there was a thought that like Ohio State in 2024 and won a national championship had Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator, and Brian Hartline was just sort of like living in that, right? Like, he was a key part of the offensive plan. He was absorbing things from Chip. He was absorbing things from Ryan Day, and there would be some level of continuity with that, like, once he ascended to play caller, both just sort of like in the capacity to do the job, but also I think in some of the creativity that Chip helped bring to the board for Ohio State. And I think the same thing probably happened for the Eagles, where like Kellen Moore, very good at his job, sort of lays the foundation, and you have a guy in Kevin Patullo who was there like working alongside of him. Well, it's just like, well, we'll just keep doing that stuff with a different guy calling the plays. And it's like, well, maybe the guy who was doing it was like a key element of it, right? Like, you can't just assume that everything is going to sort of pick up where it left off once you put a new person in that position. And I do think both teams kind of suffered from making that assumption. Now, the difference with the Eagles, or difference with Ohio State, is that Ryan Day has the background of like offensive play caller, and like the offense is still very much sort of created according to his image. Like, Nick Sirianni like has been a coordinator, but he was never a play caller. And I don't think anyone like thinks that he's just sort of offensive genius. He's more of a culture guy. But either way, I do think there were just some wrong assumptions made about the ability to keep like schematic continuity and like sort of like creative continuity with different guys calling the shots who had never done it before.
Yeah. Okay. Is it not? Did they both play slow? I'm looking at the Eagles.
Yeah, they both play really slow. Yeah.
Seconds per play. The Eagles were 27th out of 32 teams. We know Ohio State was near the bottom. But as you pointed out, this is the hard part of this. As you pointed out, I think very astutely during the college season, other good teams were playing slow this year. That maybe it was just a trend in college football. Maybe it was some schools seeing what Ohio State did in 2024 and saying that's not a bad idea. You look at some of these other teams that played slow. Buffalo played slow. New England played slow. Tampa played slow. Like, it's not just like, oh, the worst teams play slow, right? But it is there something that the Eagles and the Buckeyes were similar in having offensive talent, having offensive passing game talent, but then playing slow, which feels like maybe not taking advantage of that offensive? Because maybe you would say if you're a run the ball and defense first team, then you do want to shorten the game. Right. And we know the Ohio State idea is Ryan Day talking about wanting to keep guys healthy and fresh and play them fewer snaps. But I think, would you look back on both these seasons and find a commonality that held them both back in some way?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So the problem with both teams is that they were slow and not explosive.
Okay.
So like, oh yeah. And someone mentioned that, I think it was Dan, or I can't remember if it was Dan or Pat on Around the Shoe on Monday, mentioned the idea of one way to increase the plays for Ohio State is not necessarily playing faster, but being more explosive. Like every time they scored, it had to be a 10-play drive. They didn't have the 2-play touchdown drives and that kind of stuff, or like very rarely did they have them. So I'm seeing something here. The Eagles' 5% explosive play rate was 6th worst in the league this season, coming off of a year where they were tied for the 7th most. So they were super explosive when they won the Super Bowl, not explosive at all when they didn't win it this year. And I think Ohio State was not super explosive last year, but it was more explosive last year than it was this year. It was absolutely explosive in those first 2 playoff games that it won. Against Tennessee and Oregon. So that's like the biggest thing I think for both these. Like Ohio State was highly efficient. Ohio State had one of the more efficient offenses in the country. They just could not string the big plays together. And I think by and large they were far more efficient than the Eagles. I think the Eagles had the most 3 and outs in the league this year. So like that's a key difference between these two. But I think the idea sort of at the heart of it remains the same. It's that they were both sort of plotting offenses and couldn't like balance that out with being explosive.
Do you think both these teams had the ability to be explosive?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. I think Ohio State was searching all year to be explosive via the run. And I think a lot of that was just sort of probably held back by they didn't quite have the running back for it. And I think maybe Bo Jackson down the line can be, but he just wasn't quite that this year. Like the guy who can really hit the home run. And for the Eagles, like the Eagles have Saquon Barkley, like he can hit the home run, but their run blocking was just not as good this year. And their run game, I think schematically got a little stale too. So like that, they were both searching for explosive runs in that way. And then both like absolutely capable of hitting the explosive pass. I think like what Jalen Hurts does best is throw the ball downfield, and certainly Devontae Smith and AJ Brown can go get it. And while Julian Sayin did not throw the ball down the field a ton, when he did, it usually went pretty well, especially when he threw the Cardinal Tate. So
talked about that all year. Yeah,
they were able to hit that. I think I don't want to like. There's a time that I want to ask Ryan Day about this. The thing that I do think was really lacking in Ohio State's offense this year was the short pass that became explosive. Right.
Yes.
If they wanted to hit an explosive, they almost had to throw it 40 yards down the field. But remember, some of Ryan Day's best offenses throw a little bubble to Paris Campbell and watch them go, right? Throw a perimeter pass that turns into an explosive gain, or throw a slant to somebody, or throw a middle screen to somebody and it turns into an explosive play. And I do think they got to find ways to get back to that. And I think like the Eagles were kind of searching for that too. They were in a very similar position. It was just like if they weren't throwing the ball already 40 yards down the field to either of those receivers, or they just were not being explosive otherwise.
So there's a conclusion that I want to ask about and potentially draw here at the end, but let's do a couple more comparison points that you had mentioned. Kicking games, field goal kickers that maybe you felt like you couldn't 100% rely on.
Yeah, well, I think Ohio State fans are familiar with the Jaden Fielding experience. We don't have to relive that one necessarily, but clearly not reliable. And then the Eagles have Jake Elliott, who for a stretch was like the best kicker in the league, and actually wasn't great last year when they did win the Super Bowl, and then got even worse this year. He had like a 3-year stretch where he was making like 90% of his kicks. In the last 2 years, he's been in the 70s, and this year was like the low 70s. And like he missed an extra point on Sunday. He's missed a couple of extra points this year. He just went, and we've talked all the time about kickers even at the pro level lose it, and Jake Elliott like very, very much has lost it the last 2 years. So the Eagles didn't really have a reliable kicker similar to Ohio State.
And then we've established that these teams invest. You said the Eagles spend as much money, much of their salary cap on.
I believe I was listening to the Ringer football show, or not the Ringer, the Athletic football show, and Robert Mays said that the Eagles have spent the most money on their offensive more money on their offensive personnel than any other team in the league.
Okay, and we know how much Ohio State in the NIL world values their big time receivers, their quarterback. their passing game. They certainly do invest in that. But both these teams established defensive identities this year, right? Great defenses on both sides of the ball, which I think like prevents, certainly, it's not like there was panic mode all year, more so with the Eagles than with the Buckeyes, but they're winning. It's like, man, these offenses are capable. The talent is there to be explosive. And by the way, in the meantime, we'll put this defense up against anybody else in the country. And I think I certainly, didn't you feel like Ohio State fans felt that this year? That whatever is happening, this defense for the Buckeyes is a foundation in a world where their head coach is an offensive guy, but yet they are a defense first team in 2025. That was absolutely Ohio State, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Was that the Eagles? Would you say the Eagles were defense first in 2025?
Yeah, it took some time to evolve to that, I think. Like Ohio State was that from the jump. And the Eagles kind of grew into that. But I think by the end of the year, everyone was pretty confident in their defense being able to take them pretty far as long as the offense could do like kind of the bare minimum.
Okay. So I think we've established a raft of commonalities here. Is there anything like in terms of, there's another thing that they had in common that we haven't brought up yet?
I think like just maybe going back to the offensive side, I do think they're like pretty specific styles of quarterback, very different, Jalen Hurts and Julian Sayin. But I think, and it's mostly for Julian because he's young, a quarterback skill set that I think you do need to tailor the offense to a little bit. And I'm not sure that either team like quite nailed that.
Okay. And do you feel like, again, it's been one of the discussion points, especially later in the season with Julian Sam, when it kind of was go time. Jalen Hurts at time maybe not taking advantage of what actually was there. That if we're questioning the offensive play caller or the offensive game plan, it's like, well, actually, maybe there was some stuff there that the quarterback didn't take advantage of.
Yeah, I think a lot of Jalen Hurts discourse this year about like how much of it is on him, how much of it is on the play caller. And I think like we never really got to that point with Julian probably until the Miami game. And even when we got there, I don't think it's quite as pronounced as it was with Jalen Hurts. But I do think there's sort of like, for as easy as it is to point the finger at the coordinator situation and the play calling situation, the quarterback does have to shoulder some of the blame, I think, just with like not maybe maximizing all the opportunities that were there.
Okay. I think that's right. And again, it's one of those things. The conversation would be so different around Julian saying, because he's young, he's never done this before. Of course. I think maybe in the moment, maybe similar things were happening. It's just Jalen Hurts is much more on the hook for it than Julian Sayin is. But the bottom line is, if you're asking the offense to work, especially at peak explosiveness, it's like, well, I mean, if you would have taken that, it would have been an explosive. If you would have taken that, you wind up having a belief that, man, this offense wasn't explosive enough, but maybe you could go to the all 22 of both teams and say, well, It's not that they're not drawing it up or not that guys aren't getting open at times. It's that they're not taking what might be there.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the conclusion? And I think the point of this exercise is not to just let Philly Billy cook, although that is worthwhile in and of itself. But it is to talk about this for Ohio State fans. And is this something that can happen to championship teams? And the thing that I would put out is, you are a championship team and you justifiably have the utmost belief in what you are and what you can do and what you have and what you have done. And then there are maybe a couple key things that change, primarily here for both teams, because it's primarily an offensive conversation. The play caller changes, and you wind up with inexperienced people in a play caller role, but yet you have enough of a foundation with your talent and your players to say that's what we're banking on. And I don't think it's complacency, and it is. I actually think it comes from a good place.
Yeah.
It comes from believing in your guys. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you're sluggish and taking things for granted and drinking pina coladas on the beach instead of doing your job. It's that maybe you think to yourself, we don't necessarily have to go searching for something new, because the thing we just did won. It won it all. And the guys who did that are back. Jeremiah Smith, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, like Carnell Tate elevates and is immediately ready for it. Like enough of that, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe that belief, while everybody else is like, we got to be better. We got to be better. And I don't think this is much. Sometimes, I mean, this is like, I think what happened with Ohio State in 2014 into 2015 is a little bit more of a mental, emotional kind of like a bunch of veteran guys and like where you was hungry and that kind of thing. I think this is more attitude as it affects game plan and attitude as it affects scheme, as opposed to attitude as it then affects the team emotionally. But did Ohio State and the Eagles believe in their offensive players so much that they didn't really push the envelope in trying to scheme it up offensively? And then in the end, with new play callers, that caught up with them.
Yeah, I think so. I think like my sort of shortened piece of advice for both would just be like, don't assume anything, right? Like it's good to have the belief sort of like in your core values and your culture or whatever. Like I think for both teams, like that's pretty strong, but you can't really rest on your laurels, I think, and really in any sport. Like I think that the best championship teams keep evolving even when they win. And I don't know, particularly on offense, that either team did that. And the result was like Ohio State's offense was still good, but not quite where it needed to be. The Eagles' offense was like actually like pretty bad. So like they're not exactly the same thing, but I think the end result was just not being quite what they needed to be, because of, again, like I don't think it was misguided or like what you said, like came from like the wrong place necessarily. I just think it's kind of a lesson for any team that's trying to defend a championship is like, you still got to stay on your toes a little bit. And I'm reminded of like Ryan Day said something this season that like, what do you say? Like the second you think you got it, you're going to get it or something like that. Like there's just this idea that it's just about complacency. And again, I don't really think that's what it was, because complacency is pejorative. But there was probably just a little bit too much faith in what was on hand. And I think it would serve anybody to be a little more forward thinking and open to change, or open to like even the slightest bit of evolution, even coming off of a very successful season.
And it's just really hard to promote play callers internally who haven't done it before. And I think that is just realistic. And it is something that, as we sit here, and the point of this is to inform a college football discussion. We're looking at Oregon next year. Oregon lost both coordinators. Tosh Lapoy, the defensive coordinator, is going to be the head coach at Cal, but that's Dan Lanning, right, is a defensive guy. But they lose Will Stein, the offensive coordinator, to be the head coach at Kentucky, and they're going to promote from within with Drew Maringer, who had been on the staff at Oregon and actually is 10 years removed from being like a 28-year-old offensive coordinator under Chris Ash at Rutgers, and it did not go well. And then he has sort of been cycling back up the coaching ranks. He was at Ohio State, and then went with Chris Ash to Rutgers. But the bottom line, so he's not going to be a first-time play caller, but he's going to be a promoted from within play caller. And they've signed Dylan Raiola. And so this puts me a little on the lookout for Oregon next year. Now, they aren't a championship team, but they've been a very successful, high-level winning program that is now promoting the offensive play caller from within, I think with the intent of kind of like keep doing what you're doing, but maybe you're going to wind up, if Dante Moore goes to the NFL, with a quarterback who's a little less of a fit to sort of do the things that quarterbacks have done there at Oregon. And so you're going to keep, this is, I think, the bottom line is like, you try to keep doing what you're doing when actually you've lost a piece or two of what you did. And so the instinct, because if you just keep everybody, it's the exact same players and the exact same coaches, of course you would keep doing what you're doing. But you remove a couple things and then you keep trying to do what you're doing. And it's like, oh, okay, it's not the same. And you're chasing something that's not there anymore. I'm very curious how this works for Oregon. And if I were Oregon, I would look at Ohio State and the Eagles and just maybe check yourself and make sure that you don't settle for the same in a world when something's actually changed, because I think that's the most dangerous part of this.
I do. Yeah, that's funny. You use the word there, chasing. Like it reminded me like of what Brian Hartline said at like a Cotton Bowl media day when you were talking to him, right? Like he wanted to get down on the field, and Ryan Day was going to be back involved with play calling. And Brian Hartline said, like, we're thinking about like the dynamic we had in the postseason last year when it was Chip and Ryan and me, and we're chasing that. And it's like, well, you're never going to find it because Chip's not here, right? Like that guy, and it doesn't have to be Chip, but it's like the idea of Chip, right? And like for the Eagles, whatever, it's the idea of Kellen Moore. You just like you have to understand what it means to pull a person like that out of the operation, and to think that you can just kind of pick right back up is just a little short-sighted. Like on the one hand, like it's confident. You're like ultra confident in your abilities and what you have in place, and like I get that, but I just like I think more often than not that's going to lead you astray. It's not to say they can't ever work, but I do think more often than not it's destined probably not to.
So are the Eagles bringing back that guy, or is he done? That OC?
No, Schefter said they're going to go get. I think the word was like proven offensive mind to be the new coordinator.
Okay. And we are anticipating waiting on Ohio State potentially making an offensive coordinator hire for that same kind of thing. Would your advice to both these teams be use this change as an opportunity to reevaluate, refresh, don't take anything for granted? Yes, there is plenty of success in your recent past for this offensive style with these players, but do not take it for granted and use this change that is being forced upon you, or by choice, but like there needs to be change, but then make it real change. And it's not tear it down and come in with an entire new system, but it might be time to turn over some of the stuff that you've been doing for a while.
Yeah, I think so. And I like for the Eagles, like sort of the proof of that already exists. Like they had the year they went to the Super Bowl and lost, they lost both their coordinators and head coaching jobs. Well, they were really good that year. And then they replaced them both with in-house promotions. And it was awful. It was actually Matt Patricia ended up being the Eagles defensive coordinator at the end of the 2023 season. Because it was so bad. Like he was just sort of on staff as an analyst and they had to fire the coordinator. And then they went outside again and brought in Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore and won a Super Bowl. And still have Fangio, but then try to replace Moore with an in-house guy. But like the proof is in the pudding of what it means for the Eagles to go outside and bring in fresh ideas. And Ryan Day is still like early in this process on the offensive side of the ball. Like Chip was his first like person calling plays who wasn't Ryan Day. And it worked great. And then after that working great, forced to make another decision, he went inside and it didn't work. And I would hope that there is a lesson there. Again, not to say that Ryan Day shouldn't ever promote from within again, but small sample size, it seems like maybe going outside and bringing in a guy who can refresh some things and sort of run that side of the ball and allow Ryan Day to be the driver of the culture and the CEO of the program is what works best for Ohio State. And
Nick Sirianni is the head coach of the Eagles, and you would say that you love Nick Sirianni. Is that fair to say?
No. You want to go another half hour?
So, but here's my question, because you had brought up, you said you heard someone else say this, that for someone like Nick Sirianni in the NFL, if you need to bring in like a head coach of the offense and a head coach of the defense, then what are you the head coach of? Right. And I do think there's an important distinction here, and I want to make sure we get your thoughts on this. I think that's a valid thing to say in the NFL, because like in the NFL, if you're the head coach, you have a whole GM. Right. Mm-hmm. You have someone who's handling the salary cap. You just report to your owner. You're not trying to fundraise, right? Like you're not dealing with boosters and you're not dealing with a changing landscape of rules. And like, you don't even, so if you're a head coach in the NFL, I actually think, for instance, if Ryan Day was a head coach in the NFL, I think he probably should be the offensive play caller.
Sure.
There are plenty of head coaches. It's because it's like, what else are you going to do? And you're not trying to like, make sure that 18 and 19-year-olds are in a good headspace, right? You have millionaires who are reporting to their job, and culture matters, of course, but it's not the same as trying to build up a culture among teenagers.
No.
And then balancing this world. Well, now some of them, now they're getting paid, but now what is it? It's like these other guys in the NFL, you're at work. Mm-hmm. So I do think like that is, I think an interesting way you phrase that about Nick Sirianni. That's like, what are you doing? But I do think Ryan Ryan Day's job is harder than Nick Sirianni's job. Is that true?
Yeah, a bit like Ryan Day is like the head coach, like basically the head personnel guy and like the team president. Like all these things sort of fall under the purview of head college football coach. And maybe one day they won't, but for now they still do.
Right.
And like Nick Sirianni is just, he's leading the football on-field football product, and that's kind of it. And like a college coach just has far more on his plate than that. Yes.
Yeah. So I do think it's probably even more important for Ryan Day to maybe think about that offensive refresh, think about having somebody else coming from the outside to help and to have another voice, because he's got a million other things to do, while Nick Sirianni is just running around picking out new sweatshirts to wear, and like you're wondering why he has a job. So
yeah, I would not, out of respect for Ryan Day, I would not compare the two.
Yeah. But like in the end, do you think both of these football teams are in similar places now? They are still the defending champs. They're out now, short of expectation. Not a disastrous year. They both made the play. Like, again, they were in it. And along the way, you thought they had a pretty good chance still. But now they fell short. And so it's not panic mode. But if they don't take the opportunity to try to do a little something, it's going to be a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they'll both come back next year with among the most talented rosters in the sport, with every chance in the world of chasing a championship again, as long as they take the lessons learned from this season and apply them correctly.
And is this just a little bit of, we like adding context to what happens at Ohio State. And I do think, as always, Ohio State's best context is itself, is its own standard, is its recent history. And then you certainly have other programs in college football with who you compare Ohio State to, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Notre Dame, whether it's Texas, whether it's used to be Alabama, like those kind of things. Those are all reasonable comparisons. And now Indiana and Oregon. Absolutely. How you build a roster, what you prioritize, what your resources are, all those things. But I hope it's a little instructive of comparing Ohio State to another champion, because that's another context. Champions. Mm-hmm. How are the champs doing? And it's hard to repeat. And I think, I don't know that it's happening a ton, but like the Oklahoma City Thunder are like in a little bit of a weird stretch right now. And they kind of are doing what they do. But I think now some people are being like, well, like they always did this, and they have a defensive identity. But now people are wondering, like, do they not have enough shooting? And somebody kind of figured out, like, Victor Wembanyama is to the Oklahoma City Thunder as Curt Cignetti and Fernando Mendoza are to the Ohio State Buckeyes. Right? I mean, like we can play this game if we want to, right? Like there's a little bit of like, there's something new out there that is now in your way, champ. It's like right down the road, and you've never really seen it before. And whether it's a 7'6" Frenchman or a 64-year-old guy from Pittsburgh, you've never seen this before, and it's a pain in your butt, and it's not going away. Yeah. So what you did before to win might not exactly work right now. How about that? Take that, Joel Klatt. Is there another show out there comparing Victor Wembanyama and Curt Cignetti?
I don't think so. No, I'm just starting to look. So like the Dodgers are back-to-back World Series champs, and I think the Florida Panthers have won like 2 in a row as well. So maybe those are the teams that everybody needs to be studying.
But also, it's like if Ohio State could just be the Dodgers, it'd be like if Cody Campbell and Mark Cuban and Phil Knight were all Ohio State alumni. Right. And Ohio State's NIL was just like $300 million. And then also they found a quarterback in Japan. And it was like, oh, we got this guy.
This Babe Ruth, yeah.
We found the Red Grange of the modern era in Japan. And then Mark Cuban, Phil Knight, and Cody Campbell got a slush fund together, and we're paying him $20 million to play safety and quarterback at Ohio State. And it's awesome. But I do think comparing yourself to champs can be valuable, especially in the context of when a champ is not repeated and when a champ is not done it again. And it's like, you had the ability to do it, so why didn't you? And actually, I think you can look around and be like, oh, because sometimes that's what happens to champs. And a little bit of getting high on your own supply, but it's such a good supply. Why wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah.
Like too much belief in yourself. That's a hell of a way to go down. That's how I'm going down. When this is all over for me, that's how it's ending.
It's probably, I mean, it probably is how if you're gonna go down, go down that way. But I guess the good news for both teams is that they have a very good chance of getting back up. So but don't get too high on your own supply, I think is where we landed. Yeah.
Okay. That is the only Ohio State Philadelphia Eagles podcast that you will listen to this week. We appreciate you guys for being here. Like, subscribe, tell a friend, hit the little YouTube bell button to make sure you get the notifications. Is that the thing you hit? So you make sure you don't miss anything that we're dropping on the YouTube feed. Make sure you get notified. Make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform so that you don't miss anything that we're dropping in there. And then, of course, you can come over. We have a big chat going on every day over on our Substack where we're talking about what's happening with Ohio State. We're writing about things as they happen. We're doing 2 extra podcasts shows a week over there, usually on Wednesdays and Sundays. That's only for Substack subscribers. So if you're here and you like what we're doing here, but you want a little more of it, I think it's pretty reasonable. It's a pretty reasonable price to go over there and treat yourself to a little Philly Billy and French vanilla. But for now, we appreciate you guys being here. Again, that's Bill and Doug, OSU.substack.com. Here, he's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was the Bill and Doug Show.